Greetings, Ohio Valley. This is Dan Lima with OSU Extension from Belmont County.
And this is Karen Cox from WVU Extension in Ohio County. Thanks for tuning in to Extension Calling, your source for research-based information for the farm, garden, and home. Hey friends, we need your help. In order to help keep this show going, we need to hear back from you. Please take some time and check out our evaluation. Let us know if you like the show, and especially let us know if you've used any of the information you've gained from our show. Once again, you can reach us directly. You can call Karen at 304-234-3673. That's 304-234-3673. Or you can reach Dan at 740-695-1455. That's 740-695-1455.
Hello, Karen.
Hey, Dan.
Well, this is again, we're trying out the new platform, right?
Yeah. Hopefully this recording goes smoothly.
Yeah, hopefully we sound great.
So please forgive us if we have any technical issues on this episode as we learn a new recording system, as our old recording system no longer wants to let us do it for free. So, but anywho,
we are evolving.
Yeah, we are evolving.
Or adapting.
Make and do, which is what we do with Extension, right?
Best we can.
How do we do it at the lowest cost possible to get the best quality possible? So, yeah. But anyhow, I know that a lot of you are cleaning up your gardens, maybe storing some tubers for the winter, but we wanted to talk a little bit about pest management. I know that you're all pretty much done with pest management, but what we want to do is try to help you maybe set some parameters for next year. So while your observations are still fresh in your mind, to make a couple notes on what was a problem, what was observed but wasn't a problem, and things like that. So that way, when next year's planting season comes around, or even with your livestock, we're going to talk a little bit about that too, but just so that you can have some plans in place on how to best manage and be aware of those management objectives.
Yeah. And let's talk about what is a pest.
Yeah.
Because it can be many things. And I bet you everybody has like one thing they're thinking about, and it's probably right. And they're all different. So a pest is just something that is unwanted in a certain type of, well, just use agriculture, in a certain agricultural production, whether it's a small garden, whether it's a huge agronomy operation, whether it's animals.
Well, I'm going to narrow down your statement a little bit, though, because it's not just something that causes a problem. It's a living organism that causes a problem.
That's true. Okay. Yes. I was thinking something as in plants or bugs or sometimes mammals.
Yeah.
Deer pressure's a pest.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it.
The potato beetle's a pest, especially if you have potatoes.
Yeah. So you can have vertebrates, you can have insects and arthropods, you could have mollusks, and you can have microorganisms. And of course, then there's weeds, vines, parasitic plants. So all of those things can be a pest. But in order to be considered a pest, they have to actually be causing a problem.
Right. Like deer in your orchard is a pest. Deer, when you're out hunting, is not a pest. But the ticks are a pest.
Well, it's same situation. If the tick is just out in a place where there aren't a lot of humans or livestock, it's not a pest. And if there's only like one of them, it's not a pest. So in order for it to be a pest, it has to be considered a threat, where there are enough numbers of them to cause a potential harm, or it's a strong enough pest that just one of them can be a really big problem. So, if we talk about, something like Asian longhorn beetle, when we see just one of them, that is time to act. But if we see like 100 box elder bugs, it's just like, yeah, whatever. They're just kind of annoying, move along. So it really just depends on how severely that particular living organism will affect the target, or how many of them there are.
And let's remind people the Asian longhorn beetle is a giant beetle that will burrow into the tree. So just one, do you think, Karen, could actually cause a tree to die?
It's more so when you're looking at pests, you have what's called a control threshold. So you have a number of that pest or an amount of that pest that you are willing to tolerate. So if you are looking at Asian longhorn beetle, if you have one, odds are pretty good that you're only observing one and there's actually more in the area. And so if you have one, that is your critical control threshold. You are to act as soon as you see that one insect, because the potential damage associated with the Asian longhorn beetle is so severe. I mean, they have at least 80 different host plants or trees that they will attack. And because they affect the heartwood of the tree, they actually reduce the structural integrity of the tree, making that tree a hazard. And they spread so quickly. So for that, yeah, one insect can be at the critical control threshold.
And they're very large too.
They are. They're very large.
And when they burrow into the tree, we like to say you could stick a pencil into that hole.
The hole's actually about the size of a dime. Yeah, they're really big holes. A lot of people notice just the shavings at the base of the tree. It looks like someone's been, whittling wood.
Yeah. See, and my information might be slightly out of date, but I want to say that the last detection of the Asian longhorn beetle was down in the Cincinnati area, and maybe not like Hamilton County specifically, but like adjacent to it in that area. And they actually had to cut down a lot of trees around it just to contain it. And I think they did. Other than that, I haven't heard of another sighting or detection. It was such a big deal. In this case, they found it, like Karen said, if you find one, there's probably more than one. And they had to take very extreme measures. I mean, we're cutting down trees to contain it, just so that it doesn't spread and really devastate hardwood forests. And, there's 80 types of trees, but there are some very high value trees that it can really destroy. This is something that happened a few years back. I just haven't heard any major resurgence of the Asian longhorn beetle.
So it looks like presently there are active federal quarantines in Massachusetts and New York, so like Long Island area.
So like out of sight, out of mind, right?
Right.
No. Well,
oh, wait. There's also one in Claremont.
That's where it was. That's it. That's the county.
Yeah.
Yeah, Claremont County.
So it's still an active federal quarantine.
Okay. But that detection was years ago.
2022, I think it was. So 1 year ago.
It feels like longer.
Well, time is relative, right?
I thought it was much longer ago than that. But there are new threats that have occurred in the past few years. And, we're in a constant state of defense against many pests, some more devastating than others. But it's just something that we have to adapt. And, like talk about integrated pest management. We look at, ways not only just to kill the pest, but also make it less desirable, control it. You can't always eradicate a pest, but you can control the population like Karen was talking about with thresholds. Another one that comes to mind is the stink bugs in a soybean crop. There are economic thresholds where it would behoove you to spray and knock down the population as opposed to eradicate everything. And there are times where the population of that pest is low enough that'll actually cost more to act than to not act. And this is also kind of dependent on what stage your soybeans are in. Most of the time, when we talk about pest infestations or pest damage, even the earlier in that crop, the more devastating it's going to be. So as we progress to harvest, those insect populations, they always have an exponential growth rate. And if we're early in that exponential growth rate, you got to think about it. It's kind of flat, and then it just kind of explodes up. So when you have that kind of growth rate on a crop, when that happens sooner, you're going to get that really large spike at a more devastating time than if it happens later. So, it's just monitoring really is the key to most successful pest management strategies anyway.
Right. But there's also a secondary impact that could be the reason you need to control the pest. Let's take spotted lanternfly, for instance. One of its biggest detriments is the honeydew that it leaves behind, which allows sooty mold to grow. And that secondary impact can reduce plants' ability to photosynthesize. It can cause slipping and falling accidents if it's on a surface that you walk on. So that secondary impact can also lead you to meeting that threshold of control.
Right. And one of the ways that we monitor for the spotted lanternfly are traps. I think the trap that is mostly being used for the spotted lanternfly is that one where as they go up the tree, they kind of fall into this one-way drop into a bag where they can't climb out of it. So you're trapping everything that climbs essentially. But what you're really trying to monitor for is the spotted lanternfly. I know the sticky bands, they tried some of that stuff because the nature of that insect is to climb a tree because it's not a very good flyer. So it gets to high places by climbing. And I know with the sticky bands, they had some issues with like squirrels and
birds and a lot of other non-target animals and insects.
Children playing on the trees.
I don't think they actually captured any children using sticky bands, but that'd be interesting.
Well, I'm sure it wasn't pleasant if you did run into it.
Yeah. So how many insects do you have to have in order to get to a point where you need to treat? So when you're thinking about that on your property, you're looking at the value of the plant that you're trying to protect. Is it your great-great-grandmother's lilac bush and it's got a whole lot of sentimental value to it? Or is it a giant oak tree that is the centerpiece of your landscape and would be very expensive to remove if it were to get damaged? Or is it a crop that you need to sell in order to pay back your crop loans and survive until the next growing season? So all of those things, they have different values to them. And so depending on the value of the plant, how healthy the plant is to start with, and so its susceptibility to have this pest cause an amount of damage that's unacceptable. And of course, the type of pest we've already mentioned and its damage potential. But also think about the time of year. For certain pests, treating them in the fall isn't going to do any good. So for instance, if you're talking about bagworm or scale insects, you might notice the damage they're doing later in the summer, but treating them later in the summer is going to do nothing for you. So you can't take action in the late summer to control certain pests. So noting the time of year and when that insect can be treated is also important.
Right. And what comes to mind when you're saying that is fire blight.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Fire blight is a bacterial pest, and it is something that you're treating in February, March timeframe, and you are cursing it in August, September. Which is not when you're going to treat it, and it's something that you have to learn year one and act year two.
Yeah, and the same goes for weeds, right? So if you have a weed that you need to control, knowing if it's a summer annual, a winter annual, a perennial, that is all going to change when and how you would attack that particular weed. And how many of the weeds can you tolerate? If it's something that rapidly seeds, like poison hemlock, okay? You're going to have one poison hemlock one year, and then you're going to have 75 poison hemlocks the next year. So if you see one, you're probably at your action threshold to get in there and get rid of it.
Dandelions.
Now, we're going to go to war over dandelions.
That's a great example because it just depends on what you're doing and what your tolerance threshold is for that.
That is a great point, Dan.
Because like it's not poisonous. It can be it's I want to say it's even palatable to
It
livestock.
is.
Obviously, if you're kind of a grazing dairy, I'm not sure how much dandelion will off flavor the milk. But if it does that, well, you're talking about a whole different problem than right if you're grazing beef. Because if you're grazing beef, you're not too worried about offsetting the flavor of the milk, because that calf probably doesn't care. It might even taste better to the calf. But and I guess on a completely different note, if you have dandelions in a golf course, there's not much tolerance there at all.
This is a very highly managed product, and it has very specific guidelines for use. And so, yeah, in that situation, you'd have a much lower tolerance for dandelions and plantains than you would in a farm field or a pasture field or even your yard. So, when you should treat is really going to be based on what the tolerance is for the particular pest and what your actual end goal is. What is your expectation of it?
Yeah. You're asking me, or you're just getting us to think?
I'm just, making a statement there. And so what I'm going to go back to what Dan had mentioned earlier is one of the primary parts of integrated pest management is monitoring. And if you have a pest, you need to monitor for that pest. So let's, talk about bagworms, right? So, you had a bagworm problem last year and you went through and you picked out all the bags. Well, you need to go back through, and I'm sure you missed some. And it is a little moth, so they do fly. And so you need to be looking around, say, March through May, to try to observe for that pest. Another thing to observe would be your leaf miner for your boxwoods. That's another thing that we've had a lot of problems with in this particular region. But that requires you to have little sticky cards out that you can start monitoring when that particular pest is active so that you can take action for it.
Yeah, and sticky cards are kind of interesting as well, because in a greenhouse setting, not only is it detection and monitoring, but it's also a form of control, because you're catching, if we're talking about fungus gnats or white flies or whatever, you're actually catching some of them. So in a way, you're keeping that population low, but really the goal is to monitor that population. So if you have so many fungus gnats within an area of that card,
Mm-hmm.
you can, okay, the threshold is this is when I should spray. Because if you're spraying all the time, you're not making any money. So you need to minimize your sprays. And, people don't necessarily enjoy spending money to kill a pest. So I think for another misconception is that people, when we talk about integrated pest management, yes, it's a variety of ways to control a pest, to prevent pest damage, but sometimes it involves use of a chemical, sometimes it doesn't. And economically speaking, I would say that the use of the chemical is usually the most cost prohibitive way to do it. It's going to cost the farmer the most money to spray the chemical in most cases. I'm not saying 100%, but in a lot of cases, most farmers don't want to spray. They want to be able to monitor. So instead of spraying 3 times unnecessarily, they can get away with 2 and still have a good crop. And then your profit margin goes up.
Yeah, and there's also, when you are doing your monitoring, it's a great time to start looking at what potential abiotic causes are out there. So things like the weather, what's your humidity been like? What's the drainage like on the site? Have you had a lot of extra rain? Has some nearby construction caused the water to flow onto your property instead of somewhere else into a stream or something? Have you added a sidewalk or repaired a sidewalk? Those abiotic influences can really cause those insects and diseases to actually get up to that pest level. And by addressing the abiotic concern, you actually stop the pest problem. So spraying is always that last option, that last ditch, I need some help. This isn't working. But you really want to look at what are your abiotic influences. So when you're talking about fungus gnats need a continual moisture. A lot of times you can control fungus gnats by addressing how you water the plant, making sure you're letting it fully dry out between watering. You stick your finger in, so down to that 1 inch, let that top inch be fully dry before you water it again, and water it thoroughly when you're watering it. So that can help break that cycle. But when you have a lot of fungus gnats, then you start needing to go in and actually maybe doing some control to help get you back down to an acceptable load, or to remove the majority of that pest.
And then you adjust your watering.
And then you still have to adjust your watering. That's right.
I was going to go into that, but you just took the words right out of my mouth. But another, it's funny because, we're talking about in the like greenhouse setting, but also in your home setting. If you start to get fungus gnats, you're probably watering too much. And if you do have a greenhouse, or, you like to grow things, you have a grow room or something, watch algae buildup as well, because green algae can be a major nuisance in a greenhouse, because not only is it a slip hazard, but it also is food for a lot of insects. So sanitation is one that I don't think we mentioned directly, but it's another form of integrated pest management, where cleaning things up, throwing away diseased plants in a garden is sanitation, removing trash, removing brush piles close by to areas you don't want rodents around. Those chores are integrated pest management. So keeping things clean, sanitation is very important.
Right. And so sanitation falls under your cultural practices, where you're trying to mitigate your stress to the plant and also deter opportunities for pest development. So, yeah, like Dan was saying, sanitation, but also, improving your soil condition and drainage, making sure you are properly watering or managing exterior water, so the downspouts are going to the right locations. You're not saturating your rhododendrons or your dogwoods or something, adding mulch to your garden surface, protecting that soil, the PEDs, and making sure you're allowing the microorganisms and the worms to do their thing to help improve drainage. Also, there's physical protection. So you could have a trunk wrap, or you could have insect cover. So those are all physical
Like barriers.
Thank you. Physical barriers that are considered cultural practices to help deter pests.
Or an 8-foot fence.
Or a 12-foot fence for these deer. Oh my gosh.
So wait. You're like, I always heard 8 feet. Like the deer are we selecting for deer that can jump higher and higher and higher?
Well, so when you look at deer, it's a lot of it is they're not dumb, right? So if it's a truly valuable, tasty crop that you're trying to protect, you want to build the fence before you plant the crop, so they don't know there's something super tasty behind that fence.
That's good.
And they don't make that effort. But if they know there's something tasty over that fence, they'll jump an 8-foot fence without a problem. And so a lot of it is, they don't have good depth perception. So sometimes a slanted fence or adding a extra wire outside the fence can throw them off a little bit. But if they know something tasty's in there, they're going to keep coming. And they teach each other too. So if you've never had a deer in your field, and for some reason one day a deer is there, that deer's got to go. It's got to die, because it's just going to go tell all of its friends that there's this really yummy crop hiding behind this fence, and let's go all have a smorgasbord. 3 days later, you have no crop left.
Well, deer damage is something that isn't as straightforward as, yes, you can put barriers up, but you can't kill deer without the proper permits in place,
Well, that's true. But it's also important to know you can't relocate deer, especially, different
Right.
states have different laws, but in West Virginia, it is illegal to relocate wildlife. So you can't capture it and take it someplace else. Not that I have any idea how you would possibly do that. Maybe lure it into a livestock trailer or something, but
I was curious about that. I was hoping you'd elaborate a little bit more about that.
But yeah, like groundhogs, they can be
Yeah,
pests, and a lot of people just want to rehome them. You cannot do that. And the reason for that is it is the best way to move wildlife diseases from place to place.
that's
So
right.
just like we don't want you to move firewood because we don't want you to move those tree pests from place to place, you can't move livestock for the same reason.
And
Or sorry, not livestock, wildlife.
yeah, wildlife.
You have to have a lot of rules to follow to move livestock too.
And there are laws, and I don't know if it's state or federal, but at least I can speak for the state of Ohio. But there are there's certain pests that if you trap, you either have to release it on site or euthanize it there. You can't move it somewhere else for that particular reason.
Yep.
I want to say like raccoons are in there, skunks possibly.
Raccoons, groundhogs. Honestly, it's most wildlife.
It's the ones that give you the most headache. So if you're trapping something, it's illegal to relocate it for that movement of disease, and also it's illegal to put, or it's unlawful to move animals into someone else's property. One, you're trespassing, and two, it's just a mean thing to do to your neighbor. You're not helping things at all. You're just making someone's problem worse.
Yeah, and it's just a basic review of some of the cultural and mechanical. That's what I was looking for instead of physical. It's a mechanical control. So your cultural and mechanical controls, you're looking at correct mulch application, maybe adjusting downspouts if need be, adjusting your irrigation practices, removal of dead and dying parts of the plant or diseased parts of the plant, sanitation, removing problem parts that are on the ground, and removing places where rodents can breed, things like that, barriers and repellents, and traps. And these go for plants, but also for animals too. So removing places where ticks can harbor in next to your yard, that could help reduce tick problems, especially if you're looking at deer ticks. Now, dog ticks like nicely mown grass, so you're not going to have much protection there from that particular insect, but trying to make sure that you are not allowing for opportunities for those pests to grow to high enough numbers to become pests. And that gets you to the basics of integrated pest management, at least the introduction to it, because there's a whole lot more that you can do, biological controls, chemical controls, things like that we didn't have time to talk about today. But you can always reach out to your local extension office to ask questions about how to establish a good integrated pest management plan on your property for whatever it is you're trying to protect. Thanks for listening to Extension Calling. This show is a collaboration between OSU Belmont County Extension Educator Dan Lima and WVU Ohio County Extension Agent Karen Cox. If you'd like a transcript of this show, contact us at the office. Also, let us know if you enjoy the show by ranking us on your podcast app.